trade mechanically? Well, I guess the first answer to that is yes, of course you can. And what I'm talking about here is mechanical trading. So, i.e., you have a given strategy with given rules where it tells you where to place your stop loss, what your target's going to be, your take profit, and what your entry's going to be. So that's what we're talking about. A very specific paint by numbers type strategy, which you've back tested, and it gives you a 58% historical win rate and a given risk to reward ratio of whatever 1.6, and and you strategy and you've got a load of back tested information, and so you go off and you trade it into the real market. Now, how many of you have gone and done that historically, and you've had a brilliant back test, done it over several years potentially of data, only to, in the real world, for it not to quite deliver on those results, or it starts off fine, and then over a period of time it starts to just question whether its performance is going to continue. So I'm sure plenty of people have experienced that with strategies, and then you ditch them and you move on to another strategy. So that's one of the risks of mechanical trading, is that your strategy itself is aligned to the market during that period that you've just gone and tested it on. So you've picked two dates, whether they're over 2 years or 5 years or 10 years, whatever. And so yes, the strategy has worked historically but of course you have to be very careful not to do what we say, or do what is very easy to do, is curve fit, because you are naturally curve fitting when you say, right, I'm going to use a stop loss of 1.6 times the ATR and a target of 1.8 times the ATR. It's that type of thing that it's easy to essentially curve fit. So what you need is a strategy which is a bit more universal, and that you can see can work in almost any market condition. Okay, so when before you even start curve fitting, so to speak, that you're putting in these sort of stops and targets, by itself, does the strategy make sense to you? Does it have an application in the real world that you can say, well, okay, yeah, the pattern itself is a good pattern, whatever it is, and then it's just a case of, yeah, okay, applying some stops and targets. So ideally, the pattern will work whether you're using a 1.6, a 1.7, or whatever. It's just degrees of profitability. So that's what you want, is a pattern that will work across a range of curve fits, effectively stops and targets. And if it does that, then it bodes well. That does bode well. But I have to then still go back to my original question, is can you mechanically trade? And my big answer, and I know you're probably expecting this, is, or should you mechanically trade? And my answer is no. Okay, in all of my experience with dealing with traders over the years, of course I come across traders all the time who say, "Oh, Charlie, I've got a strategy, and I'm making, I'm doing really well with it." Yeah, okay. Let's see how you get on over 3 years, and rather than 3 months with it, or 6 months, or whatever. So, but it's not always necessarily that there's anything wrong with the strategy, but you've got to be able to trade with that strategy in the real world with real money. So, and then people will say, well, yeah, surely if it works, it works. Yes. But any strategy is going to go through drawdowns. So let me give you an example. Let's say your strategy is profitable, but at some point in the future, it's going to have a 35% drawdown. Okay. Now, are you going to be able to deal with that? How, if that is going to happen, are you going to be able to deal with a 35% drawdown at some point in the future? Maybe you get to 20%, you're like, oh, I can't trade this anymore. You hit your limit. So you have to know that what the potential is for your strategy if you're going to trade it mechanically, with regards to past drawdowns and the potential for future drawdowns. So, for example, if your strategy historically has had a 20% drawdown when you've back tested it, then really you've got to be looking in the future probably at least the potential for a 30% drawdown, because it's not going to stay within that 20% in the future necessarily. It might do, but you've got to allow for that. So then again, you've got to say, well, am I going to be comfortable with that? And this is why I say a big no, because for a lot of people, they have a strategy and they create a mechanical strategy, but in the real world, they can't actually trade it. Even if the strategy itself is fine, that's a bit of a knee wobbler there, potentially for many traders, because can they actually cope with the sort of the future drawdowns? And of course, at that point, you don't know when it's 35% down whether it's going to go 40% down or 50, whether the strategy, because some of these strategies will just fall off a cliff and just stop working, and they will just carry on going down and down and down until you blow up, so to speak. Slowly, yes, but you blow up. So what's my solution? My solution is, yes, have a mechanical strategy. Here's a positive here. So for those of you that like mechanical strategies, yes, by all means, have a mechanical strategy, but combine it with your general market analysis as well. Now, people will say, oh, but if you're going to do that, Charlie, then it becomes subjective. Yes, that's right. But at least, as opposed to just taking every single setup that comes along, and then you're in the lap of the gods, whether, if it does go into a big drawdown or not, at least if you combine it with analysis, then you can say, actually, I'm not going to take this one here. And you start, yes, it's subjective, but that subjectivity will stop you from having a 35% drawdown. So again, it comes back to the line that I used earlier in the week, which is retail traders look at how much money they can make, professionals look at how much money they can lose. And so, for example, let me give you another example. You've got a mechanical strategy, maybe it's running on a given watch list, and it's flashing up new trades across, let's say, 5 different markets there. Are you going to take every one? Are you going to use a bit of subjectivity and say, actually, I don't need to take every one of these because maybe several of these markets are highly correlated? So therefore, if you take every one and they lose, they all lose. And then you end up taking a bigger chunk of loss. So, again, that's using subjectivity, but it's using your brain. And my concern in the trading world is that people don't use it. They are using their brains. There's very clever, bright people out there, far brighter than me, who come up with all sorts of trading strategies, but all they end up doing is over the years they become strategy hoppers, because they create stuff, it works for a while, they make a bit of money from it, that creates that belief, and then the strategy ends up stopping working, and they move on to another one, and that creates another belief, and they just go on and on, year after year after year, chasing the holy grail of trying to find some strategy which is just going to work forever, and yet so often they can tail off, and yet they don't have to tail off if you add some subjectivity. But people don't want the subjectivity, because that's where you have to roll up your sleeves, ladies and gentlemen, and actually do some work outside of doing back testing, actually putting your neck on the line and saying, okay, I'm going to make a decision here outside of my back test. I've done some analysis, and actually, no, I'm not going to take every one of those trades there. Or I've got a setup over here, but the market context is X, so I'm not going to take that setup as well. And if we could just have more traders who actually use their brains universally, not purely just on chasing the holy grail of trading strategies, we might have more than 10% of retail traders making money. So, that's my little rant there. So, my view on this, and it is my view, and but in the main, most retail traders who chase mechanical trading systems end up just going for mechanical trading system. And I say system, what I mean by that, I'm talking about strategies. I'm not talking necessarily about automation, but they just jump from one to another because it is difficult. Even if they've got something that works, it's very difficult to stay with it. So why not have something that works, but in a more basic sense, but you can combine it with overall market conditions and do some actual analysis of the market. That way you're getting the best of both worlds. There you go. That's my Saturday video, I think, here this week. I hope that helped.